The bullet had torn through Benjamin Porter's thigh 3 weeks ago during a stagecoach robbery gone wrong, and now the wound festered like a curse that refused to lift. He lay in the back room of the Empire City, Nevada General Store in August of 1878, fever burning through his body while the shopkeeper's daughter pressed cool cloths to his forehead and wondered if this stranger would live to see September. Willa Norwood had seen plenty of injured men pass through her father's store in this dusty mining town, but none had looked at her quite the way this cowboy did when consciousness briefly returned to his dark eyes, as though he were memorizing her face in case death claimed him before dawn. The doctor had already given up. Old Doc Hastings had examined the wound 2 days after Benjamin had been carried into town by a fellow ranch hand, shaken his gray head, and declared that infection had set in too deep. He left laudanum for the pain and told Willa's father, George Norwood, to prepare for a funeral. But Willa had watched her mother die of fever when she was 12, had seen her father nearly lose his leg to a farming accident 5 years back, and she refused to accept that this man's story would end in the cramped back room of their store, surrounded by sacks of flour and canned goods. She had started cleaning the wound that very evening, despite her father's protests that she was wasting her time and their medical supplies. The gash ran nearly 6 inches along the outside of Benjamin's left thigh, angry and red, weeping fluid that smelled of decay. Willa boiled water, tore clean strips from her oldest petticoats, and mixed a poultice from yarrow and sage that an old Paiute woman had once taught her mother. Her hands shook the first time she peeled back the soiled bandages, but she steadied herself and worked with methodical care, cleaning away the corruption and applying fresh dressings. Benjamin screamed when the hot water touched the wound, his body arching off the narrow cot. His fever-glazed eyes flew open and he grabbed her wrist with surprising strength for a dying man. "Let me go," he gasped. "Let me die easy." "I will do no such thing," Willa said firmly, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Now hold still or you will make it worse." He held her gaze for a long moment, something passing between them in that stuffy back room that neither could name. Then his grip loosened, and he fell back against the pillow, jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscles jumping beneath his stubbled skin. She worked as quickly as she dared, cleaning and bandaging, whispering apologies for each flinch and sharp intake of breath. When she finished, he had passed out again, his breathing shallow but steady. That became their routine. Every morning before the store opened, every evening after the last customer left, and twice more during the day, Willa would carry fresh water and clean cloths to the back room. She would carefully remove the bandages, clean the wound despite Benjamin's protests and pain, apply her poultice, and wrap everything securely. Her father watched with increasing concern, worried about the impropriety of his unmarried daughter spending so much time alone with a strange man, but he said nothing. George Norwood had learned long ago that when his daughter set her mind to something, there was no moving her. The wound refused to heal. Day after day, week after week, Willa cleaned and dressed it, but the angry red edges would not knit together. The infection would seem to recede, then flare up again. Benjamin's fever would break, only to return the next day. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid enough to tell her his name and where he had come from, other times so delirious he called her by names she did not recognize and spoke of cattle drives and a ranch somewhere in Colorado. "You should stop," her father said one evening in late August, watching her prepare another batch of hot water. "Willa, that man has been here near a month. The wound is not closing. Maybe it is just his time." "It is not his time," Willa said, more sharply than she intended. she softened her tone. "Papa, I cannot explain it, but I know he is meant to live. I feel it." George studied his daughter's face, seeing something there that made him sigh and nod. At 22, Willa had turned down 3 marriage proposals, declaring she had no interest in becoming some rancher's wife, cooking and cleaning and bearing children, until she was worn down to nothing. She ran the store with a sharp mind for numbers and a sharper tongue for customers who tried to cheat them. She read every book and newspaper that came through Empire City, hungry for knowledge of the world beyond Nevada's dusty valleys. George had wondered if she would ever find a man who could match her spirit. Now he wondered if she had found one lying half dead in their back room. By early September, Benjamin was conscious more often than not, though the fever still came and went. He watched Willa with dark, intelligent eyes as she worked on his leg, apologizing for the pain he knew she was about to cause. She learned he was 26, that he had worked as a ranch hand and cowboy since he was 14, that he had no family left except a sister somewhere in California he had not seen in 5 years. He learned she loved books more than anything, that she could calculate sums in her head faster than most men could with paper and pencil, that she had opinions about politics and mining rights and the future of the territory that she was not shy about sharing. "You talk too much for a nurse," Benjamin said one afternoon, but there was warmth in his voice that took any sting from the words. "You complain too much for a patient," Willa shot back, wrapping the fresh bandage around his thigh. "I could leave you to Doc Hastings, you know. He would be happy to saw the whole leg off." "No, please," Benjamin said, and his hand found hers, calloused fingers gentle against her palm. "Do not stop. Whatever you are doing, I can feel it helping, even if it does not look it yet." Willa looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast of his sun-browned skin against her paler fingers, and felt something shift in her chest. She should pull away. It was improper. But instead, she squeezed his hand briefly before returning to her work. The wound still would not close. The edges remained raw and open, weeping fluid no matter how carefully Willa cleaned and treated it. September dragged into October, and Benjamin was now well enough to sit up, to eat solid food, to have real conversations. The fever had finally broken for good, and color had returned to his face, but his leg remained a mess of torn flesh that refused to heal. Other wounds he had sustained in the robbery, a gash on his shoulder and scrapes on his arms, had healed within days. But this bullet wound seemed cursed. "Maybe there is something still in there," Willa mused one morning, studying the wound with a frown. "The doctor said he got the bullet out, but what if there is a fragment, or a piece of cloth? Doc Hastings was half drunk when he worked on me," Benjamin admitted. "I remember that much. He could have missed something." Willa bit her lip, thinking, "I could try to look. It would hurt terribly, but if something is preventing it from healing." "Do it," Benjamin said immediately. "I trust you more than I ever trusted Hastings." That trust terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Willa made careful preparations, boiling her smallest knife, preparing clean cloths, having laudanum ready. Her father stood in the doorway, ready to help hold Benjamin down if needed. When Willa began to carefully probe the wound, Benjamin went white as a sheet and gripped the sides of the cot hard enough to make the wood creak. But he did not cry out. Sweat poured down his face. Willa worked with steady hands despite her racing heart, feeling carefully through the damaged tissue. Her fingers touched something hard and foreign. A piece of lead, smaller than a pea, buried deep in the muscle. She worked it free as carefully as she could while Benjamin breathed in great gasping lungfuls of air, and her father murmured encouragement. When she finally extracted it and held it up to the light, all 3 of them stared at the tiny fragment that had caused so much suffering. "You found it," Benjamin whispered, his voice hoarse. "You actually found it." Willa cleaned the wound more thoroughly than ever before, applied fresh poultice, and wrapped it with shaking hands. She had never done anything like that before. She had essentially performed surgery in the back room of a general store. The magnitude of it made her dizzy. "You should have been a doctor," her father said quietly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "They do not let women be doctors," Willa replied, washing her hands in the basin. "They should," Benjamin said from the cot, his eyes on her with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. The wound began to heal. Not immediately, not overnight, but within days they could see the change. The angry red faded to pink. The edges began to draw together. The weeping stopped. By the end of October, new skin was forming over the injury. Benjamin could stand with support, then walk a few steps, then make his way to a chair by the store's front window to watch the street outside. Willa continued her daily cleanings, but now there was hope in the ritual, a sense that they had turned a corner. Empire City bustled around them, oblivious to the small miracle happening in the back room of Norwood's general store. Miners came and went, their pockets full of silver from the claims in the surrounding hills. Freight wagons rolled through, carrying supplies to the smaller camps. Cowboys drove cattle past on their way to California markets. The October nights grew cold, and frost appeared on the ground in the mornings. Willa brought extra blankets for Benjamin, built up the small stove in the back room, and found excuses to sit and talk with him long after his bandages were changed. They talked about everything. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about watching his parents die of cholera when he was 12, about taking his baby sister to an aunt in California before setting out on his own. He described cattle drives through Kansas and Colorado, the endless expanse of prairie and sky, the camaraderie of the cowboys and the brutal loneliness that sometimes overtook him under the stars. He had been working for a ranch north of Empire City when he had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, riding shotgun on a payroll delivery that got hit by robbers. The man driving the stage had been killed. Benjamin had fired back, killing one of the robbers before taking a bullet himself. The other thieves had fled, and Benjamin's fellow ranch hand had managed to get him to Empire City before he bled out. Willa told him about growing up in this dusty mining town, about losing her mother and learning to run the store, about teaching herself mathematics from old textbooks, and reading every book she could get her hands on. She described her frustration with the limitations placed on women, her hunger for something more than the narrow life expected of her, her fear that she would die in this town, having never really lived at all. "You saved my life," Benjamin said one evening in late October as she finished bandaging his leg. The wound was nearly closed now, just a pink line of scar tissue across his thigh. "I would have died without you. Doc Hastings had given up. Everyone had given up except you." "I could not let you die," Willa said softly. "From the first moment I saw you, I knew you were meant to live." "Why?" He caught her hand again, and this time she did not pull away. "Why did you care so much about a stranger?" Willa looked at their joined hands, at his face in the lamplight, and felt the truth rise in her throat. "Because when I looked at you, you did not feel like a stranger. You felt like someone I had been waiting for." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Benjamin's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, and Willa felt her heart beating so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Willa," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "I have nothing to offer you. I am a cowboy with no prospects, recovering from an injury that will probably leave me with a limp. I have no money, no land, no future to speak of, but I am falling in love with you, and I do not know how to stop. Joy and terror flooded through her in equal measure. "Then do not stop," she whispered. "I am falling in love with you too." He pulled her closer and she went willingly, leaning down to meet him. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. His hand came up to cup her cheek, and she sighed against his mouth, feeling something inside her unfurl like a flower opening to the sun. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, eyes wide with wonder. "I should not have done that," Benjamin said, though he made no move to let her go. "Your father will throw me out into the street." "My father is no fool," Willa replied, brushing a strand of dark hair back from Benjamin's forehead. "He has seen this coming for weeks." As if summoned by his name, George Norwood cleared his throat from the doorway. Both Willa and Benjamin jumped, but George's expression was more resigned than angry. He came into the room and pulled up a chair, studying the young couple with a shrewd eye. "Benjamin Porter," he said slowly. "What exactly are your intentions toward my daughter?" Benjamin straightened as much as he could while sitting on a cot, meeting George's gaze squarely. "Sir, I intend to marry her if she will have me. I know I am not much of a prospect right now, but I am a hard worker. Once my leg is fully healed, I can find work, I can provide for her, I can make her happy." "Can you?" George turned to Willa. "Will he make you happy, daughter?" Willa looked at Benjamin, at this man she had nursed back from the edge of death, whose pain she had shared and whose stories had captivated her, who looked at her like she was something precious and rare. "Yes," she said firmly. "He will." George was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you, but you will do this properly. You will court like respectable people. You will marry in the church. And Benjamin, you will find honest work and prove you can take care of her. Do we have an understanding?" "Yes, sir," Benjamin said, relief and determination mingling in his voice. "Thank you, sir." "Do not thank me yet," George said dryly. "You are getting a woman with a mind of her own and opinions about everything. Life with her will not be easy." "I would not want easy," Benjamin replied, his eyes on Willa. "I want her." November arrived with sharp winds and the first hint of snow in the mountains. Benjamin could walk now with only a slight limp, and the wound had closed completely, leaving a long scar that Willa traced with gentle fingers when she checked it each day. The ritual of caring for him had become something more, moments stolen in the back room where they would talk and kiss and plan a future that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. Benjamin found work at the livery stable, mucking stalls and repairing tack. The owner, a grizzled man named Tom Sullivan, had heard about the injured cowboy who survived against all odds and was willing to give him a chance. The pay was not much, but it was honest work, and Benjamin threw himself into it with determination. His leg ached by the end of each day, but he pushed through the pain, knowing he had to prove himself worthy of Willa. They courted properly, as George had insisted. Benjamin would call on Willa in the evening, sitting in the parlor above the store, talking and laughing while George read his newspaper and pretended not to listen. On Sundays, they walked to church together, Willa's hand tucked into the crook of Benjamin's arm, and the town gossips whispered about the shopkeeper's daughter and the cowboy she had saved. Some said it was romantic. Others said Willa was wasting herself on a drifter. Willa ignored them all, secure in her choice. They talked about the future constantly. Benjamin spoke of saving money to buy land, maybe starting a small ranch of their own. Willa talked about expanding the store, maybe starting a lending library for the town. They dreamed together, building castles in the air that gradually took on more solid form as the weeks passed. Benjamin was good with horses, and Tom Sullivan mentioned that if he kept working hard, there might be a partnership opportunity down the line. The livery was profitable, and Tom was getting old, thinking about the future. In December, the first real snow fell, blanketing Empire City in white. Benjamin appeared at the store one evening with cold, reddened cheeks and nervous energy. He asked George for permission to speak with him privately, and the two men went into the back room while Willa paced the store, her stomach in knots. When they emerged 20 minutes later, George was smiling and Benjamin looked relieved. "Well," Willa demanded, "what did you talk about?" Benjamin came to her and took both her hands in his. "Willa Norwood, I know I have only known you for 4 months. I know I came into your life half dead and with nothing to recommend me. But in that time, you have shown me more kindness, more care, more love than I have ever known. You saved my life, and now I cannot imagine living it without you. Will you marry me?" Willa's vision blurred with tears. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, of course I will marry you." He kissed her there in the store, not caring that her father was watching, not caring about propriety or anything else except the feeling of her in his arms. George cleared his throat again, but he was smiling too, and when they finally pulled apart, he pulled them both into a hug. "Your mother would have liked him," George whispered to Willa. "She would have been so happy for you." They married in late December of 1878 in the small church at the end of Empire City's Main Street. Willa wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her, and carried winter berries and evergreen branches since there were no flowers to be had. Benjamin wore a new suit purchased with his savings, his dark hair slicked back, his eyes shining as he watched his bride walk down the aisle. Tom Sullivan stood up as his best man, and one of Willa's few friends, a young woman named Margaret who worked at the hotel, served as her bridesmaid. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Benjamin kissed Willa with such tenderness that several of the women in attendance dabbed at their eyes. After the service, there was a small reception at the hotel, with cake and music and dancing. Willa had never been much for dancing, but in Benjamin's arms, she felt graceful and light. They swayed together to a fiddle tune while the town celebrated around them, lost in their own world. George had prepared the small apartment above the store for them to live in, at least until they could afford their own place. It was not much, just 3 rooms with a sloped ceiling, but Willa had made it cozy with curtains and rugs and books on shelves built by Benjamin. That first night as husband and wife, they stood at the window looking out at Empire City under its blanket of snow, at the warm lights glowing in windows up and down the street. "I keep thinking I will wake up and find this was all a dream," Benjamin said, his arm around Willa's waist. "That I am still lying in that back room, dying of fever, and you are just a hallucination." "This is real," Willa assured him, turning in his arms to face him. "We are real. Everything we went through, all the pain and fear and uncertainty, it brought us here. And I would do it all again in a heartbeat." He kissed her deeply, hungrily, and she responded with equal passion. They made love for the first time that night, gentle and eager, learning each other's bodies with the same careful attention Willa had once used to clean Benjamin's wound. She traced the scar on his thigh with her fingers, marveling at the healed flesh that had once seemed like it would never close. Benjamin mapped every curve of her body, worshipping her with touches and kisses, murmuring how beautiful she was, how lucky he was, how much he loved her. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, talking softly in the darkness. Benjamin told Willa about his dreams for their future, about the ranch he wanted to build, about the children he hoped they would have. Willa shared her own dreams, about expanding her mind and her world, about building something meaningful in this rough mining town. They talked until they fell asleep in each other's arms, the future stretching before them bright with possibility. The winter was hard, as Nevada winters often were. Snow piled high in the streets, and bitter winds howled through the gaps in buildings. But Willa and Benjamin were warm in their small apartment, building a life together one day at a time. Willa continued to run the store with her father, while Benjamin worked at the livery. In the evenings, they would have dinner together, just the two of them, and Willa would read aloud from whatever book she was currently absorbed in, while Benjamin worked on repairing tack or carving small figures from scraps of wood. Tom Sullivan made Benjamin a partner in the livery by February, impressed by his work ethic and skill with horses. It meant more money and more responsibility, and Benjamin rose to the challenge. He began talking seriously about buying land outside of town, about building a house and starting a small horse ranch. Willa encouraged him, helping him save money, calculating costs and potential profits with her quick mind for figures. In March, Willa discovered she was pregnant. The realization filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She told Benjamin one evening after closing the store, watching his face carefully for his reaction. His eyes went wide, then filled with tears, and he pulled her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "We are going to have a baby. Willa, I never thought I would have this. A wife, a child, a real family." "You deserve this," Willa said fiercely. "You deserve all the happiness in the world." They told George that same evening, and the older man's face crumpled with emotion. His first grandchild. He hugged them both, already talking about expanding the apartment, about building a proper cradle, about all the things a baby would need. Willa laughed and cried at the same time, overwhelmed by how much her life had changed in less than a year. The pregnancy was not easy. Willa was sick for weeks, barely able to keep food down, exhausted from the smallest tasks. Benjamin hovered over her anxiously, remembering his own mother's difficult pregnancies, terrified something would go wrong. But Willa was strong, stronger than anyone gave her credit for, and she pushed through the difficult early months with grim determination. By May, the sickness had passed and she bloomed with health, her body rounding with new life. Benjamin found a piece of land that spring, 20 acres just outside Empire City with a small stream running through it, and good grazing for horses. The price was more than they had, but Tom Sullivan offered to loan them the difference, to be paid back over time. They bought the land in June, and Benjamin began building a house with his own hands, working on it every spare moment he had. Other men from town helped when they could, raising walls and a roof, while Willa planned the interior, deciding where each room would go. The house was small but solid, built to withstand Nevada's harsh weather. 2 bedrooms, a main room with a fireplace, a kitchen with a real stove that George gifted them. They moved in during August, exactly 1 year after Benjamin had first arrived in Empire City, more dead than alive. Willa stood in their new home, 7 months pregnant, looking at the rough wooden walls and the furniture they had cobbled together, and felt more content than she ever had in her life. "This is ours," she said wonderingly. "Really ours. Our own land, our own home." "Thanks to you," Benjamin said, coming up behind her to rest his hands on her swollen belly. "If you had not saved me, if you had given up like everyone else, I would be dead and none of this would exist." Willa covered his hands with hers. "We saved each other," she said softly. "I was dying too, in a way. Dying of boredom and frustration, feeling trapped in a life too small for me. You gave me a reason to fight for something. You gave me a purpose." Their son was born in October of 1879, exactly 14 months after Benjamin and Willa had first met. The labor was long and difficult, and Benjamin paced outside the bedroom while a midwife and George attended to Willa. He could hear her cries of pain through the door and felt helpless, remembering all the times she had tended to him while he was wounded, wishing he could take this burden from her. When the baby's first wail finally cut through the air, Benjamin sank to his knees in relief. The midwife emerged with a red-faced, squalling infant wrapped in blankets. "A healthy boy," she announced. 10 fingers, 10 toes, strong lungs. Your wife did well." Benjamin held his son for the first time with shaking hands, staring down at the tiny face in wonder. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was screaming his displeasure at the world, but Benjamin thought he was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He carried the infant into the bedroom where Willa lay exhausted but smiling and placed their son in her arms. "Hello, little one," Willa murmured, tears streaming down her face. "Welcome to the world." They named him James after Benjamin's father. Little James Porter proved to be a demanding baby, waking frequently in the night and crying lustily when he wanted attention. But Benjamin and Willa took to parenthood with the same determination they brought to everything else. Benjamin would walk the floor with James in the small hours of the morning, singing old cowboy songs while Willa got a few hours of sleep. Willa would nurse their son while reading aloud from books, determined that her child would grow up surrounded by learning. The horse ranch slowly took shape around them. Benjamin started with just 3 horses, training them for sale to ranchers and freight companies. He had a gift for it, a patience and understanding of the animals that made him sought after. Word spread, and people began bringing difficult horses to him, horses that had been abused or were too wild to handle. Benjamin worked with each one, never rushing, always gentle, until they trusted him. Willa kept the books and managed the money, her sharp mind ensuring they stayed profitable. By the time James was walking, the ranch was thriving. They had a small herd of horses, a few cattle and chickens for eggs. Willa had planted a vegetable garden and learned to preserve food for the winter. Benjamin had built a barn and corrals and had hired a young man to help with the work. They were not rich by any means, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. George Norwood spent more and more time at the ranch, doting on his grandson and helping with whatever tasks he could manage. He had hired someone to help run the store so he could semi-retire, and he seemed to grow younger with each passing month, his face lighting up whenever James toddled over to him calling Grandpa. Willa watched her father and her son together and felt her heart swell with love. James was 2 when Willa became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1882 they welcomed a daughter into the world. They named her Rose, and she was the opposite of her brother in every way. Where James had been colicky and demanding, Rose was placid and content, sleeping through the night almost from the start. She had Willa's gray eyes and Benjamin's dark hair, and both parents fell instantly in love. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Benjamin worked the ranch with increasing success, gaining a reputation as the best horse trainer in the territory. Willa managed their business and raised their children, teaching them to read and cipher almost as soon as they could talk. In the evenings, the family would gather in front of the fireplace, Benjamin whittling or repairing tack while Willa read aloud, and the children played at their feet. Sometimes, usually late at night after the children were asleep, Willa would run her fingers over the scar on Benjamin's thigh, marveling at how much had grown from that terrible wound that had refused to heal. All the hours she had spent cleaning and bandaging it, all the pain and fear and uncertainty, had led to this life they had built together. The scar was a reminder of how close they had come to never having any of this, and it made her treasure every moment even more. "You ever regret it?" Benjamin asked one night, catching her hand against his leg. "Giving up your dreams of something more, tying yourself to a cowboy and a ranch?" "Never," Willa said fiercely. Benjamin, you are my something more. This life we have built, these children we are raising, this ranch we have created from nothing. This is bigger and more meaningful than anything I imagined for myself back when I was just the shopkeeper's daughter with her nose in a book. I love you, Benjamin said, pulling her close. I will love you until the day I die and beyond. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. We are the best thing that ever happened to each other, Willa corrected, kissing him softly. The years flowed past like water. James grew into a serious boy with his father's way with horses and his mother's love of learning. Rose was sunny and charming, wrapping everyone around her little finger with her smile. In 1885, another son arrived, whom they named Daniel. He was followed 2 years later by another daughter, Sarah. The little house that Benjamin had built with his own hands expanded with additions and new rooms, growing to accommodate their expanding family. George Norwood passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1888, having lived to see 4 grandchildren and his daughter happily settled. They buried him in the Empire City Cemetery next to his wife, and Willa grieved deeply for the father who had supported her dreams and accepted Benjamin into the family without reservation. Benjamin held her through the long nights, understanding her pain, helping her process the loss. The ranch continued to prosper. Benjamin took on more help as the work expanded, and he and Willa began breeding horses instead of just training them, developing a bloodline known for intelligence and stamina. Buyers came from as far away as California and Colorado to purchase Porter horses. The children grew up working alongside their parents, learning the value of hard work and the satisfaction of building something with your own hands. In 1890, when James was 11 and Rose was 8, they hired a teacher to come to the ranch 3 days a week to tutor the children. Willa supplemented the lessons with her own teaching, determined that her sons and daughters would have every educational opportunity she had lacked. James showed an aptitude for mathematics that thrilled his mother, while Rose had inherited her love of literature and could often be found in the barn reading to the horses. Benjamin's legs still ached sometimes, especially when the weather turned cold or a storm was coming. The scar would throb, a reminder of those terrible weeks when his life had hung in the balance. But he never complained. Instead, he would find Willa and pull her close, thanking her once again for refusing to give up on him, for cleaning that wound every day no matter how hopeless it seemed, for believing he would live when no one else did. Time moved forward with relentless momentum, as it always does. The children grew taller and more independent. The ranch expanded until it was one of the most successful operations in the territory. Empire City evolved from a rough mining camp into a real town with proper buildings and civilized amenities. Nevada achieved statehood, and the wild frontier slowly became less wild. Through it all, Benjamin and Willa stood together. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, financial setbacks and personal losses. They celebrated their children's achievements and comforted them through disappointments. They made love in the dark hours of the night and held hands while watching sunsets over the mountains. They argued sometimes, both having strong wills and firm opinions, but they always made up, neither able to stay angry at the other for long. On their 15th wedding anniversary in December of 1893, Benjamin surprised Willa with a trip to San Francisco. They left the children with Benjamin's hired hands and Tom Sullivan, who had become like family over the years, and took the train west. It was Willa's first time seeing the ocean, and she stood on the beach with tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the vastness of it. Benjamin held her hand and thought about how far they had come from that back room in her father's store, From the desperate days when a wound that would not heal had seemed like a curse, instead of the blessing it turned out to be. "If I could go back," Willa said that night in their hotel room, "back to that day when they brought you into the store more dead than alive, and if I could see everything that was going to happen because of it, all the pain and fear and uncertainty, but also all the love and joy and family, I would not change a single thing. I would make the same choice every time." "To save me," Benjamin said, his voice thick with emotion. "To save us," Willa corrected. "Because that is what I was really doing, saving the life we were meant to have together." They made love that night with the sound of the ocean in the distance, celebrating 15 years of marriage and the lifetime still ahead of them. When they returned to the ranch, their children greeted them with hugs and stories about everything that had happened while they were gone, and Benjamin and Willa settled back into their life with renewed appreciation for everything they had built. James left for university in California in 1895, determined to study animal husbandry and modern breeding techniques to bring back to the ranch. It was hard to let him go, but both Benjamin and Willa supported his education, knowing it would serve the family well. Rose, meanwhile, announced her intention to become a teacher, inspired by her mother's love of learning. Daniel and Sarah were still young, but already showing their own unique talents and interests. As the century drew to a close, Benjamin and Willa would sometimes sit on the porch of their ranch house in the evenings, watching the sun set over land that belonged to them, listening to the sounds of their children and the horses and the life they had created. Benjamin would unconsciously rub the scar on his thigh, and Willa would cover his hand with hers, both of them remembering. "That wound saved us," Benjamin said one evening. "If it had healed quickly like it should have, I would have recovered and moved on, gone back to whatever ranch I was working for. We never would have had time to really know each other. I would have just been another patient, another stranger passing through." "But it did not heal," Willa said softly. "It stayed open for weeks and weeks, giving us time to talk and learn about each other, giving me a reason to care for you every single day. I think maybe it knew what it was doing. Maybe it refused to close until our hearts had opened instead." Benjamin pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her body against his. "I think you are right," he murmured. "I think that wound was the smartest thing about me, holding out for the woman who could heal it." In 1898, James returned from university with a degree and a fiancée, a smart young woman named Elizabeth who had grown up on a ranch and understood the life. They were married that summer in a ceremony much larger than Benjamin and Willa's simple wedding had been, with people coming from all over the state to celebrate. Benjamin stood beside his son and thought about his own father, gone so many years now, wishing he could have seen how the Porter line had continued and thrived. Rose went east to a teaching college, determined to make a difference in children's lives. Daniel, now 12, had declared his intention to become a veterinarian, fascinated by animal medicine. Sarah, at 10, was still deciding what she wanted to be, but showed talent for art and music. The ranch house was filled with life and noise and love, everything Benjamin had never thought he would have during those dark days when he lay dying in a back room. The new century arrived with celebration and hope. Benjamin was 48 now, his dark hair threaded with gray but his body still strong from ranch work. Willa was 44, laugh lines crinkling around her eyes, her hands work roughened but still gentle when she touched him. They had been married for over 20 years, and the love between them had only deepened with time, tempered by hardship and brightened by joy. James and Elizabeth gave them their first grandchild in 1901, A girl named Lily, who had her grandfather's dark eyes and her grandmother's serious expression, even as an infant. Benjamin held the baby with the same wonder he had felt holding his own children, marveling at the continuation of their story. Willa watched her son with his daughter and remembered Benjamin pacing the floor with infant James all those years ago, singing him cowboy songs in the dark. They added more hands to help run the ranch as it continued to grow. The Porter Ranch was known throughout Nevada and beyond, producing horses sought after by ranchers, the cavalry, and wealthy buyers looking for quality animals. Benjamin had trained his sons and several of his employees in his methods, ensuring his legacy would continue. Willa managed the business side with the same sharp intelligence she had once applied to running her father's store, making investments and decisions that kept them prosperous even when times were hard. In 1903, Rose returned home to teach at the new school that had been built in Empire City. She boarded in town during the week, but came home for weekends, filling the house with stories about her students and her efforts to bring quality education to the frontier. Daniel left for veterinary school, following in his own path while staying connected to the ranch and animals he loved. Sarah surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to study medicine, inspired by stories of her mother nursing her father back to health all those years ago. "You did that," Benjamin told Willa one night after Sarah had gone to bed. "You inspired our daughter to become a doctor because you did surgery in the back room of a store with nothing but determination and a sharp knife. You showed her that women can do anything." "I just did what needed to be done," Willa protested, but she was pleased nonetheless. "If Sarah becomes a doctor, she will do far more good than I ever could." "You saved my life," Benjamin said seriously. "And in doing so, you created all of this. 4 children who are going out into the world to make their own marks, grandchildren who will carry our story forward. A ranch that provides good horses and employment. You did all that, Willa. Never diminish it." She kissed him then, this man she had loved for over 25 years, this man whose wounded leg had brought them together. His hair was gray now, and his face was weathered by sun and wind, but to her he was still the most handsome man in the world. And when he looked at her, she saw in his eyes the same love and devotion he had shown from the beginning, never wavering, never fading. The years continued their steady march. More grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch with young voices and laughter. James took over more of the day-to-day operations, allowing Benjamin to step back and simply enjoy the fruits of his labor. Willa spent more time with the grandchildren, reading to them as she had read to her own children, passing down her love of learning to another generation. Rose married a fellow teacher and had children of her own. Daniel opened a veterinary practice in Empire City, serving the ranchers and farmers of the region. Sarah became one of the first female doctors in Nevada, working in a hospital in Reno and saving lives just as her mother had once saved her father. In the spring of 1910, Benjamin and Willa celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary. They had 9 grandchildren now, ranging from infant to 9 years old. The ranch was being run by James with help from Daniel's oldest son, who had grown up loving horses as much as his grandfather. Benjamin was 58, still active but moving a bit slower, his legs sometimes giving him trouble. Willa was 54, her hair completely gray now but her mind as sharp as ever. They took a walk around the ranch that anniversary evening, just the two of them, following the stream that ran through their property. Benjamin moved carefully, leaning on a walking stick, and Willa matched her pace to his. They stopped at their favorite spot, a rise overlooking the valley where they could see Empire City in the distance and the mountains beyond. 32 years, Benjamin mused. More than half my life now. I cannot even remember what it was like before you, Willa. You are so woven into everything I am that I cannot separate you from myself. That wound brought you to me, Willa said, as she had said so many times over the years. That terrible wound that would not heal no matter what I did. I thought I was failing, day after day, because I could not make it close. But now I understand that it was healing in its own time, in exactly the time it needed to give us this life. Benjamin pulled her close, and they stood together on the rise, watching the sun set over the land they had built together through determination and love. The scar on his thigh ached, as it often did these days, but he welcomed the pain. It was a reminder of how far he had come, of the woman who had refused to let him die, of everything they had created together. I love you, he said simply. I have loved you since I first opened my eyes and saw you there in that back room, even though I was too delirious to understand it then. I will love you forever in this life and whatever comes after. Forever, Willa echoed, rising on her toes to kiss him, and every single day of it. They walked back to the house as twilight fell, hand in hand, their children and grandchildren waiting for them. The ranch house blazed with light and warmth, filled with the family they had created, the legacy of a love that had begun with pain and persistence, and had grown into something beautiful and enduring. The wound had finally healed, all those years ago, but the scar remained, a permanent reminder that sometimes the things that nearly destroy us can actually save us, if we are willing to fight for them. That night, surrounded by family, with children playing and babies crying and laughter filling the air, Benjamin caught Willa's eye across the room. She smiled at him, that same smile he had fallen in love with decades ago, and he smiled back, his heart full. The wound had closed. The love remained. And that was all that mattered. They grew old together, as they had always planned. Benjamin eventually handed over the ranch completely to James, content to spend his days sitting on the porch with Willa, watching their grandchildren play and telling them stories of the old days. He told them about cattle drives and cowboys, about the wild frontier that was quickly disappearing, about meeting their grandmother when he was injured, and she saved his life. The grandchildren listened with wide eyes, and Willa would add details he forgot, the two of them weaving their story together as they had woven their lives together. In the summer of 1915, Benjamin's leg began to trouble him more seriously. The old wound, healed for 37 years, seemed to remember its injury. Pain radiated from the scar and walking became difficult. Willa tended to him as she had in the beginning, with gentle hands and fierce determination, but they both knew this was different. He was 63 and his body was simply wearing out. You saved me once, Benjamin said one evening, holding her hand. You cannot save me forever, love, no one can. I can try, Willa said stubbornly, tears in her eyes. I know, Benjamin said, cupping her cheek, and I love you for it. But Willa, when my time comes, I want you to let me go knowing I had the most incredible life. I was loved beyond measure. I had children and grandchildren. I built something lasting. All because you refused to give up on a dying cowboy. I have no regrets, my love. Not a single one. He lasted through the summer and into the fall, surrounded by family, never complaining despite the pain. On a crisp October morning in 1915, 37 years almost to the day from when he had first arrived in Empire City with a bullet in his leg, Benjamin Porter died peacefully in his sleep with Willa holding his hand. He was 63 years old, and he left behind a wife who had loved him with everything she had, 4 children, 13 grandchildren, and a legacy that would endure for generations. Willa grieved deeply, as was expected, but she did not break. She was 60 now, and she had lived too fully to simply give up because Benjamin was gone. Their children rallied around her, bringing her to live with James and Elizabeth in the main house, making sure she was never alone. The grandchildren visited constantly, and Willa continued teaching them, reading to them, passing down the story of how she had met their grandfather. She lived another 12 years, watching grandchildren grow up and have children of their own, seeing the ranch continue to prosper, witnessing the world change in ways she could never have imagined when she was a young woman in a frontier mining town. She never remarried, never even considered it. Benjamin had been the love of her life, the man whose wound had brought them together and whose healing had bound them forever. Willa passed away in her sleep in December of 1927, just days after what would have been her 50th wedding anniversary. She was 72 years old. They buried her beside Benjamin in the Empire City Cemetery, under a headstone that read, "Willa Porter, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She healed with love." Her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren stood around her grave and remembered the story she had told them so many times, about a cowboy with a wound that would not close and the determined woman who cleaned it daily until it finally healed, about how that simple act of care had blossomed into a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. The ranch continued for many more years, passing down through generations of Porters, each one knowing the story of Benjamin and Willa, of the wound and the healing, of love that grew from pain and persistence. Empire City grew and changed, eventually becoming a modern town that barely resembled the rough mining camp it had once been. But the story endured, passed down from parent to child, a testament to the power of refusing to give up, of caring for someone even when hope seems lost, of love that grows slowly and surely until it becomes the foundation of everything. The scar on Benjamin's leg had faded after death, returning his body to the dust from which it came. But the mark he and Willa had left on the world, on their family, on everyone whose life they touched, remained indelible, a scar of love on the fabric of time itself. They had lived fully, loved completely, and built something lasting. And it all began with a wound that would not close, cleaned daily by a woman who refused to accept defeat, until finally, inevitably, it healed and in healing, created something beautiful that would last forever.